So, friends, I'm super excited to welcome Mr. Natan Sharansky and Mr. Gil Troy to talk about their book, Never Alone, which I hope that most of you read already, if not the whole thing, at least parts of it. So you will see what the discussion is about. But if not, you still have plenty of time to catch up and read the book. We have plenty in the office. We'll be happy to give it to you when you're ready to pick up. So please don't forget to make your order, right? So little advertising in the beginning. And with that, here are the rules. I will ask a few questions in the beginning, and then I will have everyone else. I will give an opportunity to everyone else to also ask your questions, but I will not unmute anyone. So please, if you have questions, you can already start putting them in the chat box. So when I finish with mine, we can also ask the questions that you have to both. So first of all, I was really wondering, how did it come about? Who approached who, rather? How did you decide to collaborate in writing this book?
Okay. Well, when I was already coming to the end of my term in Jewish agency, and here was a big debate was going about are we Jewish people and the state of Israel diverging or converging? Are our splits can be bridged or not? These mutual accusations that they betray our Jewish values or they betray our Jewish state were heard from both sides. And then I thought that my experience of 9 years in prison and my 9 years in the Israel government, my 9 years in Jewish agency, give me a good opportunity to watch, to see, and to be involved in this development of these relations from three different points of view. And my feeling and my experience is clearly showing that in spite of all the divisions, things which unite us, our deep desire to continue our mutual journey through history as one Jewish family, is much stronger than all those debates and divisions. And I wanted to share it in the book, which summarizes or compares my 9 years in prison in Jewish agency and in Israel government. And then I proposed to Gil, who I knew as a very good writer, but also very active Zionist fighter. I proposed him to write this book with me. Now, Gil, you want to add something?
There's a funny part to the story because there was a bit of misunderstanding at first. What happened was I was coming out with this book called The Zionist Ideas, an update of a book from 1959 called The Zionist Idea, which is a collection, Zionist anthologies, different Zionist voices. And I thought, who would be the perfect person to write the foreword to it but Natan? And we had a friendly relationship. And so I sent him an email, and now I know how he thinks. He got the email and he decided yes, but somehow he didn't tell me that. And then 6 months later or 3 months later, I get a call from his secretary saying, please come meet with Natan. So I think we're coming to talk about the Zionist ideas. And Natan plunges into this fascinating conversation about the tensions he's seen in the Jewish agency and the need for us to build a new dialogue, and are we converging and diverging? And I'm going, where is this conversation going? And I don't want to be rude, and we're having a good back and forth. And at a certain point at the very end, because I'm watching my clock and I know that he's, the Jewish agency, the chairman of the Jewish agency, we're in this, very impressive Ben Gurion office. He's got to move to an important appointment and stop talking to this useless academic. And at a certain point I say, what about this, the Zionist Ideas preface? He said, oh, of course. He said, but will you write the book with me? And I go, what book? And from there we unraveled it. Now, the truth is, my main thing is being an American presidential historian, and I write about Zionism as well. But I don't play with anybody else in the sandbox. I've always written books by myself. And it was a real stretch to work with somebody, but it was also a real privilege because there really was a kind of, you know, the Talmud talks about chavruta and two minds being better than one. And I could go from sentence to sentence and idea to idea and show how Natan's experience and Natan's perspective and my experience and my perspective came together and created a hopefully a more powerful and more understandable idea. So it really was a privilege. And then we signed a contract for the book to be 999 following this. And indeed the structure of the book is the 9 years in Gulag, the 9 years in Israeli politics, the 9 years in Jewish agency. But I didn't like the title because you don't want a title to be an inside joke. You don't want a title that Germans would go 999. That's, you know, very German and very negative. I also worry that my evangelical friends would see 999, think 666 in the Bible and the devil and who knows what. So I'm sitting with a friend of mine, David Suissa, in the LA Jewish Journal in Los Angeles. And I tell him we're looking for a title. He'll tell me about the book. And I said, well, this critical moment when Natan is in the Gulag for 9 years and the KGB keeps on telling him, you're forgotten, you're abandoned, you're alone. And he goes, but I knew I was never alone. That's it, David says. For 75 years, we've been focused on never again. And of course, we honor our Holocaust martyrs, but we don't just want to be anti-Zionist. We don't just want to be anti-Semitic. We want a positive vision. And for the next generation, what better way to explain to them the power of the Jewish family, the power of the Jewish community, the power of the Jewish experience, than by telling them, when you're part of this crazy, wonderful family, you're never alone.
Wow, that is incredible. Also, you mentioned, I think in the foreword, that the actual English writing was really done by you most of the time, Gil, right? And
well, it was a back and forth. Natan spoke.
Yes.
I typed.
Right.
I would often work until 4 o'clock in the morning trying to get it right. Then he would wake up often at 5:30 in the morning while I was snoring away and start editing. And then we'd meet around 10 and he would edit what had been gone. And so we went back and forth and we literally went through every word, every sentence, every phrase. He has a mathematician's mind. I don't. I have a historian, storytelling approach. He's a great storyteller, but he sometimes has a different logic. We argued about all kinds of things, but we never disagreed ideologically. Now think about that. We come from such different experiences. We come from such different worlds. And yet ideologically, our love of the Jewish people, our commitment to Israel, to Zionism, united us and gave us a common language. And that's what we're trying to develop in the book, a common language for all of us, all over the world, all of the Jewish world. And frankly, also, we're trying to speak to non-Jews who care about peoplehood, about community, about identity, about freedom, to have a common conversation.
Natan, did you start writing a book before pandemic or during?
Well, we've just finished the book when pandemic started. So we
I see. So we
had really few lines at the very end about pandemics, but that was already then. No, we started it almost 3 years ago and we finished it.
It took a little longer than we expected. And you can ask our wives about that.
Now, I want to share something with you. Our congregation has a long history with support the fight for freeing the Soviet Jews. And just a few days ago, one of the congregants, they're here now on call, Shirley and Stu Bauer, shared with me that they decided to write a letter, Natan, to your mom. And to their surprise, they've received a response from her in like mid-80s. And so I want to share with you the letter. That unfortunately, the copy is not very clear, but I bet you'd recognize your mom's handwriting in spite of it. So let me share the screen. Can you see?
Yeah, well, of course. That's my mother. She's writing.
Yeah, so in this
sentence, it's on the fourth year.
Умер мой муж. You see, умер мой муж. So she's
she's writing it in 1981, soon after the death of my father.
Yeah.
And, No, look, it's very important, the fact that people were sending letters or were coming as tourists, were expressing all signs of solidarity. Until this day, some people are meeting me in the street and say, oh, all our class sent you letters. Did you receive them? And I say, of course, I didn't receive any of your letters. But KGB received. And that's what's important. KGB knew very well that Jewish people
Join the meeting.
and that was the struggle of all the Jewish people. And our enemies felt it very well. And the pressure was very strong. And in the end, world jury and people like those who were writing this letter to my mother, or those who were coming so students, or those who were demonstrating, or those who were speaking to their senators, in the end, they reached a situation when practically all the most important interests of Soviet Union were linked to the fate of Jewish activists like me. And that what let us, gave us opportunity not only to continue struggle, but successfully defeat Soviet Union.
But this is our great communal failure. And one of the things that motivated us in writing the book, one of the things that's been so interesting in the Zoom conversations we've had since the book came out, our generation, which really heroically stood up for the Soviet Jews and saved them and stood up against the evil empire, hasn't told that story to our kids and our grandkids. And this is not ancient history. This is our lifetimes, our biographies. And what's been really interesting is part of the whole book tour has been encouraging people, inspiring people, and challenging people to tell your story. Tell what you did. Tell how you stood in the rain in Solidarity Sundays. Tell how some of us went and actually visited the Soviet Union. Tell how, and when, as an American, I didn't believe that we were really going to take down the Soviet Empire. But I believe that as a Jew, as a Jewish citizen, as an American also, I had no choice but to do my best to help these people, to let them know that they were never alone. And the fact that it succeeded, and the fact that the people on the inside, one of the things that was interesting in writing the book is I discovered Natan, Avital, their small circle of refuseniks saw the weakness from within. We only saw the strength from outside. We saw the evil, but we also saw the strength. We didn't believe that it was going to collapse. And they understood that it was like this big giant and that we could be a bumblebee and give them the potent allergen and they would collapse. And what a great story. And we don't tell that story.
And Gil, we have on the call today our confirmation class of 10th graders. And as a matter of fact, last year, in the beginning of the year, I taught the story of refuseniks. So at least our 10th graders will be familiar, and they recall the lessons that we had 2 lessons. So again, another picture. This is the very typical envelope that would go out to different country from SSSR, right? USSR.
Yeah. Anyway, but if Mrs. Bauer, she's the member of your community.
Yeah. And right here's the picture of presenting in the newspaper article, holding the letter.
Yeah. Okay. Well, send her our best regards, and thank you. See, no doubt that nobody can say whose contribution was more important for my release or release of other Soviet Jews, or for the opening the gates of Soviet Union. It was the struggle of hundreds of thousands of Jews from different communities for 20 years. It was a great fight. And every letter like this was a contribution to this time.
Natan, I must ask you at least one question about your time in camp when you served in the labor camp. So I don't think you mentioned it in the book, but what kind of labor did you actually have to do?
Well, labor camp is considered to be a better place than the prison, because in labor camp, at least you communicate with a few dozens of other prisoners. In the prison, you sit in a small cell. So for under the sentence, I was supposed to spend 3 years in prison, 10 years in labor camp. Because of so-called bad behavior, I spent, from my 9 years, I spent more than 8 years in prison. From these 8 years, I spent half time in solitary confinement. And from this solitary confinement, 405 days in punishing cell, which is especially tough place. But in those, whatever, 7-8 months that I was in the labor camp, it was the work with the metal. It was physically not easy, but the very fact that you are not in the isolation, that you are communicating with others, because helped. And as I tell the story in my book, Fear No Evil, once I even organized the celebration of Hanukkah in the camp with the other prisoners who was not Jewish, but who were so excited by the idea of this celebration of the victory of the small group of people against empire. So it became very symbolic. And for this, that was the end of my spending time in the labor camp, and I was sent back to prison in order not to influence bad, and because of my bad influence on the others.
So it was like a vacation for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So a question to Natan. Now, a totally different side of this book towards the end. Sorry, admitting. Natan, you compare your habit of double thinking in Russia, saying that, you know, the right thing, that you had to say the right thing in public, right? Whether it was in university, in school, or in your workplace, and then thinking something completely different, and in the very intimate circle, discussing totally different things. And that was throughout your whole life, and I can identify with it as well. So with what kind of advice could you give to American youth who are, from what I witness, they are experiencing that same double thinking? And I mentioned to you just prior to this call, what occurred during our discussion earlier today in the confirmation class, how it was so obvious that the children shared that they wouldn't really say what they think, even if they feel that some of the conversations would turn against the Jews, and yet they would not feel comfortable to speak up against anti-Semitism in the presence of other people, non-Jews. So would you have any advice for this?
Well, first of all, thank you, Rabbi. You touched very important topic. By the way, in addition to our book that we speak a lot about it, we just recently published an essay with Gil, Doublethink, in the Tablet magazine. So I really think it happens to be extremely important topic for the modern American life. And that's why in order people, especially young generation, will understand better what this phenomenon means, let them took us back to the Soviet Union. I know exactly the day when I started the life of the loyal Soviet citizen. I was 5 years old. Stalin died. Stalin was the awful dictator. And 5 years, you don't appreciate what an awful dictator he is. And I come home and my father tells me, we Jews are very lucky. You should remember all your life that when we were in a big danger, miracle happened, Stalin died, it's very good for Jews. Well, he didn't tell me the details about doctors' plot, about the trial against doctors, Jewish doctors, all the campaign Soviet Union against Jews, the plans to exile Jews from all the big cities to Siberia. It was all planned to start doing on Pesach, Passover, but on Purim, Stalin died. So my father didn't give me all these connections. I didn't know what's Pesach and Purim. I don't know if he knew at that moment that it's Purim, but he told me, remember all your life, but don't tell it to anybody, do what everybody does. And I go back to the kindergarten and I cry together with all the children about death of Stalin. And they sing songs about son of all the people, Stalin. And I have no idea how many of these children really cry or how many of them cry like me because their father told them that they have to do it. And that is the life of typical Soviet citizen. That's how I started it. When you live all your life and you read what you're permitted to read, and you say things which you're expected to say in order to guarantee your career, in order to guarantee your success in being admitted to the university, to the best universities. And you know that all this is lies. But the real truth can be said only among friends, the very small circle. And it was a very uncomfortable life. You don't even understand how uncomfortable it is until you stop it. And I stopped it when I discovered Israel, and when Israel helped us to start learning about ourselves, about our history, about our people. And then you rediscover your identity, and that gives you strength to start fighting. And then you finish with the double thinking. Then you're a free person, even if it is dangerous, even if there are arrests, you will spend time in prison. But the difference between being the double thinker, who has to censor himself or herself every moment, and the one who's speaking really his mind and is fighting for real values, was a huge difference. And you definitely prefer to be a free person in prison than slave in Soviet Union. So you believe that this double think is the phenomena of dictatorship. And so how big was my surprise many years after, when I'm as a minister, at the time of Second Intifada, when we in Israel feel that we are the forefront struggle against terrorism, against anti-Semites, but also terrorists. And it is 2001, 2002, just after 9/11. And I come to America, travel from one university to the other, and I hear how many Jews tell me that they are afraid, that they want very much to sign a letter of support for Israel, but they know that some of their professors will not like it. And that's why they prefer to be silent and to wait until their career will be guaranteed. And when I heard it from the girl from the business school of Harvard, I thought, my God, it's Moscow, in the Moscow University. It's in the center of the free world, in Harvard Business School. And it was a shock for me. And then that was the moment when we started different programs from Israel of strengthening Jewish pride and Jewish identity of young students at the universities. And we write a lot about it in the book. And today, the fact that so many young American Jews, and not only Jews, by the way, the polls show that so many Americans prefer not to express publicly their views because it can undermine their career. It's unbelievable. You see, you yourself voluntarily agree not to be free people, to give away your freedom. It's not because of KGB, it's because of public opinion, because of career. It's one of the most precious things which all the people have. And of course, Jews, is their freedom, their right to speak their mind freely and express solidarity with your family, with your people.
Gil, as a historian, do you have an explanation how is it possible that in the most free country in all of the world, in the United States, people are self-censoring themselves?
It's a great question. Before I get to it, I just want to point out that this is not a left-right issue. This is a right and wrong issue. That we know that there's a lot of bullying from the far right, and my left-wing friends are very good at seeing that. And we know there's a lot of bullying from the far left, and my right-wing friends are very good at seeing that. And as with anti-Semitism, we said we have to police our own selves. Our left-wingers should be making sure that there's open, honest, clear conversation and no anti-Semitism in the left-wing camp, and the right-wingers have to police themselves in the right-wing camp. So we shouldn't fall into, so much of the conversation in America today is left and right, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about intellectual honesty. We're talking about intellectual integrity. We're talking about not being bullied by Twitter dumb, and I spell Twitter dumb D-U-M-B. We're talking about not letting social media run the conversation, because that's not the real conversation that's going on. And we're talking about using things like your synagogue, and I don't know anything about the politics of your synagogue, but as an opportunity for people who disagree to learn how to disagree amicably and to learn from one another. It's terrifying to me when we all sit around and we all agree. I learned to disagree. As I said, Natan and I disagreed about all kinds of things, and that's how we sharpened our minds. And that's, of course, the Talmudic vision. So, and imagine how hard it was for me, how devastating, how depressing it was for me to share that poll with Natan after all he did to fight for his own freedom and the freedom of people around the world, to show him the poll that 63% of Americans today, left and right, check themselves sometimes and don't feel that they can express themselves. Now, where does this come from historically? I'll give two quick answers. One, if you read one of the great analysts of America, Alexis de Tocqueville, back in the 19th century, he says something really fascinating. He says he's this French aristocrat who comes visiting and traveling around America in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. He goes, wait a minute. This is a place that's so open. This is a place that's so highly individualistic. And I've never seen people so much following the herd, so much conforming. He says they have the freedom to be individualistic, but they have a fear of being too individualistic, and they always go with a group. So there is something in the American character, even going back over a century, that we have the ability to break out of the box. We also have this fear of being different. And I think our 10th graders know that. They know that dance. I also know as a historian that we have periods of ups and downs when it comes to partisanship. We have periods ups and downs when it comes to openness in the conversation in America. And unfortunately, at this moment, partially due to social media, partially due to the searing debates we've had over Donald Trump, I don't care where you stand, right, left, pro, con, unfortunately, due to this notion that I have to agree with you 100% in order to vote for you, that we are now at a moment where we have very little tolerance for deviation. And I always like to say that my rabbi on this is the former New York Mayor, Ed Koch. Ed Koch said to us, he said, if you agree with me on 7 of 12 things, please vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 of 12 things, please see a psychiatrist. The notion that every single thing Joe Biden does is perfect, or that every single thing he does is evil. The notion that Donald Trump is all perfect or all evil doesn't make sense. And we need to be people in the middle. And so part of it is learning how to see things with nuance, but part of it also is about having the courage to stand up. And especially in our universities, if our universities aren't centers of critical thought, if our universities aren't centers of being able to go up to somebody and say, you know what, I disagree with what you said, and instead of shaming you on Twitter, let's have coffee and learn from one another, then what are we doing there? And it's painful for me because I'm a professor. I love the university. I'm a case of arrested development. I got to the university and never left. But I want the university to be a place where we sharpen our minds and sharpen our wits and sharpen our positions by engaging with disagreements and other perspectives, not just whipping each other into a frenzy. And that's how we have to make sure that our next generation isn't a generation of double thinkers, but of free thinkers.
And that's what I'm trying to also promote, the free thinking in our religious school. But that ultimately also can lead to a division between the Jews. So why do you think that anti-Semitism, and you have that chapter towards the end, can divide the Jews? Anti-Semitism, instead of uniting, can actually divide the Jews. Why is it?
Well, that's a question which we address a lot, and unfortunately, we have to address it practically every day. The thing is that anti-Semitism in different areas is taking different forms. When Jews identify themselves as Jews mainly religiously, it was a religious anti-Semitism in the area of the first years or centuries of Christianity. It was all Christian, religious anti-Semitism. In the years when Jews started identifying themselves nationally, it became attack on the nation, and all the Nazi propaganda in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, Jews defined themselves as a nation, and the anti-Semites attacked the nation. And when Israel became a very important part of Jewish identity in today's world, maybe it's the central, it's playing the central role, Israel is under attack of anti-Semites. And so at this moment, when at the same time, anti-Semitism as hatred toward Jews and anti-Semitism as hatred toward Jewish institutions and Jewish state grows simultaneously on the left and right, it's so important to see both sides and to fight against all types of anti-Semitism. Otherwise, simply one form of anti-Semitism turns into the other. And we write a lot about it in our book, how difficult, and Gil just now spoke about it, how easy it is for the people on the left to attack anti-Semitism on the right and vice versa, and it gives nothing. It simply continues this polarization. It is very important that people will recognize the danger of anti-Semitism in their own political camp. And because it is our political polarization which suddenly divides us around the question of anti-Semitism, and we cannot afford it. Anti-Semitism was always something which united us, whether it was blood label in Baghdad or Dreyfus trial or any other act of anti-Semitism. All types of Jews, independently from their political views, were fighting together. It is very important not to let our enemies to convince us that what happens on the left is not anti-Semitism, or what happens on the right is not dangerous.
If partisanship makes us so myopic, it so distorts our vision that we cannot even see the enemy, then it's not just shame on them, but it's shame on us. It's not just their problem, but it's our problem. And we really need to do a tikkun, do a healing within the Jewish community, starting off by being very, very clear that I can agree with you on certain things, but if you cross that line and you start demonizing Israel or delegitimizing Israel or using double standards, these are Natan's famous 3Ds, or if you cross that line and you start saying, well, you know, I like Israel because it's a good military power, but those Jews I hate, then we're going to call you out. And I'm someone who's very careful, especially with my students. I try to avoid calling somebody an anti-Semite. In order for me to call somebody an anti-Semite, they really have to earn it, because there's so many haters out there that if I'm not in the margins, I'll put it aside. But there are so many people today. And by the way, we joke that this is a great gift that we as Jews have given in a world that's so polarized between left and right. They can at least agree on Jew hatred. But we're not going to fall into that, right? And we really have to be very, very careful and say it's a very clear line, right? My African-American friends, my gay friends, my women friends are very clear. First of all, it's not for me to explain as a gay person why I feel you're being homophobic. The burden of proof is on you as a feminist. If I feel like you're being sexist, it's not for me as a feminist to start explaining it. The burden of proof is on you. Why is it within anti-Semitism, all of a sudden we have to start explaining why it really is true that you're making us uncomfortable? And it's very clear. If you clump us together as one, if you look at all us as doing one thing, and look what happened during COVID, right? All of a sudden you see this meme of COVID 1948. All of a sudden you see these accusations that Israel is spreading the Jew virus in order to make money off the vaccine. We see that when there's this awful situation with George Floyd and police brutality, all of a sudden somehow Israel is guilty because Israel supposedly trained the American police in police brutality, as if Israel needs to give America training in racism. How is it that every problem in the world somehow the Jews have their fingerprints on? It doesn't pass the smell test, and we cannot accept it.
So then I actually didn't have that question, but apropos what you just said. So then how does Israel fight that in the media? Do you think that? I mean, because they're not clearly doing a good job at doing that. So
part of this gets to the other part of your question, where you say, you know, if we have so many disagreements, isn't that problematic? Well, the disagreements and the diversity can also be a source of our strength. And one of the things we talk about when we talk about Israel and diaspora is that Israel understands that their best advocates, their best friends are you people. The best friends that Israel has, the people who can really explain it best, are American Jews. And in fact, the best people to call out the people in George Floyd are the people who are there marching, who are marching against racism, who are marching against police brutality, but are saying we're marching against police brutality and American racism. We're not going to add Israel to the mix. And similarly, who are the best people to call out Trumpian anti-Semitism? Not left-wingers and not Israelis, but people who were those Orthodox Jews and others who were supporting Trump. So that's where we actually see that we may have disagreements, we may have diversity of opinion, but we also have unity. And similarly, we've seen through something like Birthright, that when American Jews say, how do I find inspiration? How do I get a taste of what it's like to live 24/7, 365 days a year as a Jew? You're not going to really get that in New Jersey, but you're going to get it in Jerusalem. And that's not a critique of Jerusalem, of New Jersey, it's a blessing of Jerusalem. And so we have to learn from the blessings how to work together. And that's our failure. Our failure isn't that we have disagreement. Our failure is to let those disagreement be blocks to the conversation that we needed to have. And to go back to the Soviet Jewish movement, one of the things that Natan really taught me, and we try to teach in the book, is that we all shouted, Shlachat Ami, let my people go. But it didn't mean that we didn't argue, and they didn't argue about left wings and right wing and religious and non-religious. It didn't mean that there weren't competing Jewish organizations all for Soviet Jewry. We could unite on certain things and divide on other things. And that became a source of strength, not a source of weakness.
I think that the great example of unity that I personally experienced with some of people here on call is the march against anti-Semitism across the Brooklyn Bridge, where all movements, and you could see absolutely the representatives from all the movements from across all denominations of Jewish faith. And it was truly an exhilarating moment. The only thing is when we got through at the end of when we already crossed the bridge, there were a couple small groups of ultra Orthodox with the signs, against Israel because they don't believe it. Yeah, so that was the only disappointment. But overall, it was absolutely exhilarating. And last question before I open it to the congregation and both Temple Shalom and Congregation Adat Shalom, totally different subject. So Natan, you were talking in your book about participation in Operation Salmon, which, by the way, I also didn't know about. Well, clearly because you worked in the Jewish agency, you really made sure that you were on the plane to go and get those Jews from Ethiopia. And also you talk in your book about bringing the Falash Mura and the controversy in the Israeli government behind it. And the controversy was because most of them weren't really Jews according to the halacha, right? And there is the law of return that was really complicated to apply to this Jews from Ethiopia or partial Jews from Ethiopia. So do you think that this law has somewhat changed? Will it change, or is it still remaining the same?
Well, there are many aspects of your question. And I really wanted to start answering your previous remark about the fact that Israel is not really doing a good job in fighting anti-Semitism. I only want to mention, yes, we write a lot in our book criticizing Israeli government for not being sensitive enough to the needs of the American Jewry, of world Jewry, not always be on the level of fulfilling its historical role of Israel being home and place for all the Jews of the world. And we have this criticism, but at the moment we share our criticism and our knowledge about some of the huge mistakes, like negotiations about the Kotel, for example, which were initiated by Prime Minister, which I led for 4 years, which was approved compromise, and then Prime Minister retreated. So, but having said this part of criticism, we immediately go to the opposite side, where world Jewry is, where Israel government feels that world Jewry is not sensitive enough to our security. So it is very important to remember, exactly as we were speaking about anti-Semitism, very important to remember that we have always to look for the other side too, to turn the chessboard, to try to look by the eyes of Israeli government at the moment when we are very furious and very disappointed. And with Israelis, I always try to convince them at the moment when they are so disappointed, try to see by their eyes on our situation. And by the way, with the Ethiopian Jewry, it's also the story of big enthusiasm, big love. And I describe in detail the operation Shlomo, and what an unbelievable enthusiasm was. We felt like we are closing this, really the exodus from Egypt of Moshe, and now the exodus of the Black Jews from Africa. And it was unbelievable. and it's not accidental that I'm writing in details my my feelings at that moment. But then it started. All the Galactic Jews came, and then there are those who 3, 4, 5 generations ago converted to Christianity under the brutal force of the regime then. And by the law of return, they cannot be brought. But then the chief rabbis decide that in this special case, we have to make an effort. And then they are brought by the law of entrance, different law, but provided the fact that they agreed to do the Humrah, they are given the rights of the newcomers from the very first moment. And then Israel feels, after many debates inside Israel, feels very comfortable with this, good. But then suddenly we hear accusations from some American Jews, and I describe in detail how I was shocked to hear it in Ethiopia, just at the moment when we are doing this unique operation, that BBC correspondent says, but some Jewish American leaders tell me that you're bringing, you don't agree to bring Jews from Africa because they are black, and you're bringing non-Jews from Russia because they are white. They say, what? Then I find out that that is in their desire to make this Israeli government to accelerate the process. That's what some American Jewish leaders were saying, and that's, by the way, how started one of the real blood libels against Israel. Oh, it's not black and white. It's a complicated story. If the same laws were applied to Ethiopian Jewry as to Russian Jewry, then nobody from Falashmura could come, because, as you know very well, from Russia, if you don't have grandfather, grandmother Jewish, you cannot come there. But so on one hand, it was a very noble story. On the other hand, yes, it was very complicated. Integration of Jews from Africa to Israeli society is a very complicated process. Still, I think it's much less painful than racial problems in America, but it is a problem. And we have to see it openly, to discuss it openly, and to see where both sides can contribute to bringing and integrating Jews from Africa or from any other place in the world.
So I want to take the questions now. Thank you for this answer. I want to take the questions from some of the congregants. So Jeff Altman is asking, Natan, you have some interesting stories and thoughts about Bibi Netanyahu. Just curious, with you being out of the government, does he reach out and talk with you for your perspective these days? Well,
first of all, we describe in the book how when Bibi became a prime minister 10 years ago, one of the first things he asked me to join him in the government, and I refused. I told that, I was 9 years in prison and 9 years in the government. I was in 4 governments and I resigned twice, and I was in 4 prisons and I never resigned. So probably government is not a good place for me. And then when he said, so you don't really want to be in public office? I said, no, if you support me as a candidate to be the head of Jewish agency, I'm interested. Because it is, of course, you have to be elected, but you have to be supported also by Prime Minister. So he was surprised, because usually those who are the chairman of Jewish agency want to go to the government. And he was vice versa. And I explained, because the challenges between Israel and Jewish people, that's something that I'm dealing all my life and I'm interested in. So yes, when I was the head of Jewish agency, I had numerous discussions with Prime Minister, and as a result of it, many of the initiatives and projects of cooperation started. And I have to say that the negotiations about the non-Orthodox prayer at the Kotel, that was direct result of our discussions and Prime Minister's initiative. But of course, there were also conflicts, and we speak very open about very serious conflicts and disagreements. Today, when I am one of those who believe that he was outstanding, great Prime Minister, but you must be also ready to face that at some moment you have to finish your political career and think to prepare the next generation of leaders and not to fight with the possible candidates who will replace you. we still, sometimes we are discussing things, but he has too much on his plate at this moment to think about. Though I can't say that we are talking often.
Well, even Moses had a hard time to pass on his leadership to Joshua and to Joshua ben Nun. So it's not easy.
Yeah. It's not easy, but the leader has to face it. It's not good for democracy when leader stays for too long. Even he or she is extremely successful, and we can see now that the fact that our country is the first who's getting out of the COVID means that our leaders took a right strategy. It's enough to compare strategy which was chosen by Bibi Netanyahu a year ago and the strategy which was chosen by Germany or by France or many other countries. So no doubt he made some extremely important strategic decisions in the economy, in the resistance to Iran deal, in COVID. With all this, even the best of the leaders have to know that 2 terms is a good time to finish.
Thank you. And question from Paul Lake, and maybe a little bit similar to what we already discussed, but nevertheless, you tell us that, it's a question to Natan also, you tell us that you could see the weakness from within the USSR, while too many outside were fooled and saw strength. Does this color how you view some of today's international challenges and how you think these challenges should be met by Israel, the West, and diaspora Jews? So you can see it in the chat box if you want to look over this long question.
To whom this question? To both of us?
I think, yeah, probably both.
Yeah. So if I can jump in,
Sure.
One of the things I learned from Natan is the power of the dissident, the power of the lone voice. And I think that really is a defining perspective that he got from his experience in the Soviet Union, the power of one person. At any given, one of the things I discovered was that at any given moment during the whole Refusnik struggle, while there were obviously thousands and tens of thousands of people who wanted to go to Israel, who applied for visas, he was never able to get more than 150 people to sign petitions. So it was really an incredibly small movement. And that small movement can move mountains. And I had the privilege of watching a Zoom call between Natan and Jimmy Lai. And every one of us should be saying, oh, Jimmy Lai, and shaking our heads, but I'm sure most of you are going, who's Jimmy Lai? Jimmy Lai is the heroic Hong Kong dissident who is a multimillionaire, who was, I think, a garment king, and then he bought a daily newspaper, and he's been under tremendous pressure by the communist government, the Chinese government. And he has the ability with his money and his British passport to leave Hong Kong. But instead, he and Natan had a conversation when he was on the cusp of being sent to prison for who knows how many years, and in his late 70s. And for me, it was so moving to see one person who spent 9 years in the Gulag and got out, another person who might be spending another 9 years in the Chinese Gulag on the way in, and the heroism that this man had. And he was kind of speaking to Natan to get what we call in Hebrew chizuk, strength, but he gave us so much strength in the phone call. I'm putting in the past tense because the video was taken down, who knows by whom. But I saw the power of the individual. And I've learned so much that when we look at the situation in Iran, we look at the situation in Syria, we look at the situation in Hong Kong, we as Americans, as Jews and Israelis, have to support the dissident. We can have good relations with the Saudi Arabian government if it works to our advantage. We can negotiate with Iran if that works, although I don't think it does. But we must always have a very clear human rights line supporting the dissident. And by doing that, we support democracy wherever we go. And that's the message I really got. I'm quoting my lessons learned from Natan Sharansky.
Yeah, well, following this about dissidents, I have to say that we dissidents in prison had absolutely no doubt the Soviet Union is going to fall apart. In fact, my friend Andrea Marik in 1969 wrote the book where the Soviet Union will survive until 1984. And of course, it took 84 from the famous book of 1984, but and he was sent to prison for this book. But in 1985 came Gorbachev to power and started dismantling Soviet Union. in accordance with the prediction of the distance. Because we saw how much energy this system is spending to control the minds of 200 million people. And it was clear if only the free world would stop giving energy to this system, it will fall apart. And at the same time, Sovietologists, some of them very famous, or some of them the heads of some important committees in the Senate, like Fulbright, some months before falling of the Soviet Union were predicting that Soviet Union will exist forever. And because they were looking from the outside, and it looked like such a powerful country with such a powerful military parade with all these missiles and all these millions of people enthusiastically supporting it. And we knew that they are all double thinkers, that nobody supports that. Their number of dissidents is small, but all the rest are practical double thinkers. Nobody really believes in the system. At the moment it will weaken, it will all fall apart. Why it is important to remember, because unfortunately, some of the leaders were following the dissidents, listen to the dissidents, and then in the last 12 years, in 4 years of Trump and before, in 8 years of Obama, practically unique connection between American leaders and dissidents in Arab countries, in Africa, in Asia, practically stopped. And I hope very much now there are first signs that maybe it will resume. I think it's very important. It is because of this disconnection from dissidents, Iranian revolution was betrayed, and nobody really understood what was happening in Syria and Egypt. But because they were not listening what dissidents from these countries, democratic dissidents, were saying. So let's hope that, first of all, Americans will overcome their doublethink and will be ready to keep democracy and freedom in America. That's the only hope which the world has, that America will remain bastion of democracy and human rights. And then that America will restore its relations and linkage and all the policy with having dialogue with democratic dissidents of dictatorships.
Gentlemen, we have 3 more questions, and we have about 7 minutes left. Will you be willing to stay just a few more minutes? Because I think those are good questions. Thank you. And by the way, when someone wrote me a private message just saying, thank you to Natan for the fact that you were able to get out from Soviet Union meeting me. This is for having you as our rabbi. So it's really thanks to you and everyone who fought to free Soviet Jews, also my in-laws and my husband on the call, also grateful to you for that. Okay, so from Rabbi Moshe Rudin, the Rabbi of Congregation Adat Shalom, Natan, seeing you is like seeing a vision out of the prophets of Israel. I remember when your plane landed at Ben Gurion, it was truly a messianic moment. How do you see your victory and the victory of world Jewry and people of conscience everywhere, especially in the age of Navalny and Putin?
Well, of course, I'm very upset with the policy of Putin towards Navalny and the other competitors or dissidents. And I think Navalny is an extremely courageous person and very inventive. And just when he started the hunger strike, I was interviewed from Russia about my long hunger strike. And they said, well, there are some things, his situation is much better and some which much worse. Much better because in order to inform the world that I'm going to have hunger strike, I spent few months organizing the message through prison to somebody who is going to be released in a few months, that he will tell to my relatives, and then I'll know that they know that, and I'll start this hunger strike. And then, but when it did happen, then the campaign in all the world was unbelievable. And it continued for 110 days, but in the end, such a big pressure the Soviet Union was organized that made them to change a lot of their policy. So, so the good thing is that Navalny, the world knows immediately what he's doing. The bad thing is that the world cares less today. But yeah, the influence of people like Navalny, you could see that hundreds of thousands went to the streets in the Russia. In fact, his message was, I am not afraid, you also should not be afraid. As to the meaning of the victory, I really believe that it was the victory of the size of Exodus from Egypt, the most powerful totalitarian regime in the world. All the leaders of the KGB, the most vicious secret people, were telling me that that is the end of Zionism, that is the end of Jewish activity, that's the end of all. And then 50 years later, Soviet Union didn't exist, KGB doesn't exist. 2 million Jews left Soviet Union, 1 million lives in Israel, another million in different other countries, and all the world is a more free place. And that is the victory. It's not my personal victory. It's not even Israeli victory. It's a victory of all the Jews of the world. And the fact that we somehow are ignoring, but we are looking for the ways how to encourage young generation. And we are thinking about the examples of Maccabees and King David and the heroes of the resistance at the time of the Second World War. And we forget to tell what you American Jews, what world Jewry, what Israel did in our generation. Why you are here, where you are now, and I am where I am now, why all the world looks different, why 1 million Jews of the former Soviet Union live today in Israel, and Israel is different. That is the huge victory which has to remind us every day what is the power of our people when we are connected, and when we are true to our ideals.
Thank you. Question from Tony Litvak. I think Gil can answer this question too, although Tony referred to Natan. Who would you say were some of the political leaders of the US who advocated and pushed for the release of Soviet Jews during the late 70s and 80s?
There was this amazing thing called bipartisanship back then, which didn't mean that Republicans and Democrats agreed on everything. In fact, they fought like cats and dogs. They fought tooth and nail about all kinds of things: social policy, affirmative action, environmentalism, et cetera, et cetera. But Ronald Reagan from the right, Henry Jackson from the Democratic Party worked together, and they said, this shall not stand. Daniel Patrick Moynihan was a Reagan critic when it came to cutting the budget. And when it came, he was a liberal Democratic senator from New York for 4 terms. I know where you guys are, New Jersey, but the neighboring state over there. And Moynihan and Reagan disagreed about many things when it came to domestic policy, but they agreed that the horrific attack in the UN on Zionism as racism was wrong, and they agreed that Soviet Jews should be freed. So what we learned from that is the need to sometimes put your partisan differences aside and have a bigger, broader vision. And that also is part of the message, as we've been saying, of the Soviet Jewish movement. And I want to add one more thing. Rabbi, I love your accent. And I love Natan's accent. Why? Because it's so crazy. The 3 weeks in my life that I visited the Soviet Union in 1985 was the first time as an American, as a spoiled brat American.
Right here, don't bring.
I felt what it was like to be unfree. And all of you are bringing to us.
Hold on. Sorry, Gil. Let me mute again, everyone, and then you'll unmute yourself. Sorry. Why do I not? Hold on. All of a sudden, I don't see the mute button. Hold on.
You knowing the experience of unfreedom, either from your parents or from yourselves, are able to help us as Americans and as American Jews be sensitive to the need not to have doublethink, not to have groupthink, and to be free thinkers. And so it's so important that we hear your voice. And I think that, there's a tendency sometimes for the immigrant to feel inadequate, to feel like they don't necessarily have something to give. We know that's not true. We know that the power of immigration is that each immigrant group brings from their experience and adds to the American tapestry, to the Jewish tapestry. And so I just want to say more power to you. And it's really important that we hear this voice of freedom from you. We're hearing it in Tablet Magazine, and we've never met before, but I'm thrilled to hear your voice, your vision coming through to the young people and to your congregants.
Yes, certainly.
I only want to mention that President Carter, it's really interesting. Today it looks very strange that Nixon and his Secretary of State Kissinger were absolutely against public pressure on the Soviet Union because of the Soviet Jews. And then Democratic Senator Jackson, initiated the amendment saying that just at the time when America was ready to sign free trade agreement with the Soviet Union, and Secretary of State Kissinger and President Nixon were insisting that is the best way what we can do for everybody. And he said, no, without freedom of immigration, there'll be no freedom of trade, free trade. And that was a critical moment in our struggle. Then comes Democratic President Jimmy Carter, who during his campaign is bringing human rights in the center of American policy. And it was huge encouragement for us. Later, he happened to be a very weak president, and we were disappointed in many things. But no doubt the very fact that he changed the language of international relations and brought human rights very powerfully was very important. And then comes, of course, President Reagan, who said Soviet Union is an evil empire, which was the best day for us in Gulag was when it became clear that now the American leader sees the real nature of Soviet Union. So all these were very important, but again, they were acting only because the world jury was acting. And that's how we succeeded in our struggle.
And if I could just add, I was a graduate student at Harvard at that time. And when Ronald Reagan gave that speech, all my colleagues said it was a terrible speech. And in fact, Henry Steele Commager, who was the Dean of American Historians, called it the worst speech by a president in American history. And that's why when I say that, I was in Harvard in the 1980s and Natan was in the Gulag in the 1980s, Natan often points out that means that he had moral clarity and I had moral confusion.
By the way, speaking of accents and languages, someone asked me after my conversation with Natan, what language did you talk on? And I said, of course, Russian. We have last question here from Inda Seshter. When you were refusing and in prison, were you aware of what we were doing here in the US and in Israel when we were protesting? And some of us, including me, took turns chaining ourselves to the Soviet embassy in Washington and getting arrested to get publicity for the movement. Well, it's in your book. You're saying, no, I mean, you couldn't get any information at all, but you felt it.
Yeah, well, it must be clear. I didn't have any information. Well, year and a half of interrogations before the trial, isolated from all the world. After this, imprisoned by law, I have the right every half a year to see my family, but for bad, so-called bad behavior, bad influence of others, I had in 9 years, I had 2 private meetings with the family. So in these private meetings, I really learned a lot, but it was 2 days from 9 years. So I couldn't know a lot. KGB made everything to convince me that I'm alone, but I was absolutely sure because of my years of activism and the years of connection with different Jewish communities, and we write a lot about it in the book, I was absolutely sure. I imagined how the Jewish world now is fighting, what at this moment my wife is doing, what the government is doing, what Jewish organizations are doing. I imagined it. I didn't know. But when I was released, I found out that my imagined world was a real one and not the world of KGB. So it's very good that you changed yourself at the embassy and you marched and demonstrated it all the pressure of the Soviet Union, which didn't permit them to kill me or the other refuseniks, and which made them under the pressure of the politicians who linked our life with the economical interests of the Soviet Union to start retreating, releasing us, and then opening the gates. And in the end, the Soviet Union without Iron Curtain simply couldn't exist, and it fell apart.
And finally, I just want to thank someone on our side who made this meeting possible, this panel possible. It's a lifelong learning program. It was made possible through the generous support of the Blanche and Irving Laurie Foundation. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for your time. I think that this was terrific. If you want to watch yourself, I can send you the recording.
We'll post it on Facebook.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you very much. Keep up the great work.
yes,
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you. All right.
Laila tov.
Good.